All right, so the class you guys are going to go through right now is part of our, what'll be our manufacturing basics course. It'll have different stuff in it. You guys will be doing reading tape measures today. How many people have experience reading a tape measure? Some know. So did you do it at work or through hobbies, like woodworking? Both? Okay. Both? Both? All right, good. So this will be easy gravy for some of you guys. For some of you, it'll be new. What I'll be asking throughout is if you do have experience, share tips and tricks. Because this is one of those things, everybody thinks it's super easy to read a tape measure, but it isn't. If you haven't done it before, you're going to be counting lines, and there is no shame in counting lines. But eventually you want to learn how to do it quickly and easily, so you have that confidence. Once you learn how to do it, it's automatic. You'll be like, I can't believe I couldn't do this right away. So, but we're going to go through some basics. Even though a lot of you guys have some experience, a lot of people coming in here have never read a tape measure. Or they read it wrong. And they go out on the shop floor and they work with somebody who maybe doesn't read them the right way, and they learn really, really bad habits. So we want to get you into good habits before you even get out there. Yeah. It's my first day. There we go. All right, you guys already know Eric and I because you've been stuck with us for a few days. We won't go through that. Although that is our contact info. If you don't see us around and you want to talk to us about anything, about what you're doing here, about continuous improvement, whatever, reach out to us anytime. We love to talk to people. Nobody ever talks to us. So what we're going to do for this class, we'll go through parts of a tape measure. We'll go through basics of reading a tape measure. Talk a little bit about scale. And you guys are going to get lots of practice. So you get a little bit of practice throughout, and then at the end we're going to have you got some bolts and some good stuff on your tables. We're going to have you work in groups and just measure stuff, all right? So, and if you're working in a group and you work with somebody that's not really familiar with it, let them work it out and help them, but don't just tell them, yeah, it's 3 1/4. You know, the only way to get better is to practice, all right? All right, so why? So why do we care about measurement? So I want you guys to imagine, especially you, Jim, that you're working on a job site and you've got to go 19 stories in the air. You're like, hey, we've got this JLG 1850. It'll do it. You're like, okay, cool. So you hop in it. You know how to run it. You've run some machines. You run it up. You're running. You're 17 stories up, 18 stories up. Little jib part's coming up. You know you're almost there and it stops. There it goes. That's off. Like, messing with the E button. You're trying to get it started again. You're messing with toggles. Radio's not working. You can't get a hold of anybody. Wind's blowing, you're a little upset, right? Why are you upset? What is the only way to get down from an 1850 that's not running? It's not working. Gotta have another 1850. It's the only thing in the world that'll go as high as this machine. No other machine's close. Now you're not gonna shimmy down, right? You can get a helicopter in, that's the other way. So you either get an 1850 from somewhere hopefully close by, or you get on a helicopter, you can climb up a ladder. How ticked off are you going to be if you have to do that? Jim's not going to be very excited.
I wouldn't be.
He's like, I'm not going up at all. But see, what could have happened in that case is somebody was laying out the hydraulic hoses. Maybe they were a little bit new, and they're like, man, it seems like there's just too much here. Maybe they grabbed the wrong ones. Put them in there. A couple stations down, the guy's adding in the service loop. He measures it and says, well, that's almost 12 inches. That's pretty close. It'll be good. I know the engineers worked a little wiggle room in there. Well, guess what? You had 2 wrong measurements. That adds up. So when the guy's running it up, it goes, and it pulls that hydraulic spin, and he said, you got nothing. That's no good. So we don't want to do that, so that's why measurement's important. There are lots of reasons, but that's just one good example. Safety, of course, is always really important, but if you're the guy that got stuck up there, are you ever going to want to be in a JLG again? No. Nope. You're like, no. Give me one of those blue things that's leaking oil all over. All right, so let's talk about measurement basics. So everybody's got a tape measure in front of them. You'll notice they're a little bit different. That's one drawback about tape measures. They aren't necessarily always consistent. Oh, sorry, I didn't give you one. Grab all that whole kit stuff. So So all tape measures are essentially the same. They'll have a thumb lock on the front. Sometimes they're on the bottom. Actually, Dave, yours is on the bottom. It's like a little thing. What that does, it just releases it so you can open it and close it. You can lock it in place, retract it. So that's all that thumb button does. Woo! We're going to talk about never ever do that in about 5 minutes.
Or the unbreakable.
Yeah, these are the unbreakable ones. So there's a belt loop on the back, right? Stick it on your belt. One thing I will mention about that, if you're working in an area around painted parts, watch swinging your hips around if you're going to ding up the paint. You know, so it might be better if it's in your back pocket, if it's in a vest pocket, something like that. So you want to drop them. Whoops. The blade, right? The part with the numbers on it's called the blade. There's a hook on the end. And if everybody grabs their tape measure, you'll notice there's some play in the end. It kind of moves a little bit. At least it better. It's supposed to. So the movement in the hook accounts for the thickness of the hook. So if I need to push this up against something, the hook moves in, the thickness of the hook itself. If I hook it onto something to pull it pulls out a little bit to account for the thickness. So don't ever snug up your ends. Leave them a little loose. They should be a little bit loose. There's a little slot in the end of your hook. There's probably a really important use for that, but I don't know what it is. And some of you guys will notice on the top of your tape measure blade, there are imperial measurements. Those are your inches. Sometimes people call them standard. Standard and imperial, same thing. And on the bottom might be metric. Some of you have metric and imperial, some of you only have imperial. So we're going to swap them around a little bit so you can see both. And then sometimes we'll have like a little wrist strap on them. Now that you know the basic parts, let's talk about how to take care of a tape measure. Care and feeding, right? So first and foremost, be gentle with them. Don't drop them like I just did. When you're done with it, don't throw it on the table. What happens, that spring, that mechanism in there that helps retract it, gets messed up and it doesn't retract, and it's really, really frustrating, right? Nobody likes to have to fight to put it back together. So using a tape measure, you're going to get oil on it, you'll get grease on it, they'll get dusty, they can get wet. Keep them clean, but don't use paint solvents or anything real exciting on a tape measure. Just dry towel's usually fine. If it gets soaking wet for some reason, leave it open to dry a little bit, because what'll happen, it'll gum up. And again, it's just not going to retract properly, and that's a little bit frustrating. So keep them clean. Don't throw them around too much. Don't bang them around. Just set them down when you're done with them. And be careful. So remember I said the part with the numbers is called a blade. It's called a blade for a reason. If you're retracting a tape measure from way out yonder and you just let it go, you put your hand in front of it, it will cut you. There's nothing more fun than open a tape measure and it's got blood on it. You know what happened? Somebody probably ran it across their hand. Don't stop it with your hand. Leave it hooked on the table. Release the button. Either walk it up or help it in. Be gentle with it, but be careful with it. Don't modify the end. Already talked about that. Don't tighten up that little hook. Let it have a little bit of wiggle room. Don't throw them at people. If you're not wearing metatarsal shoes and you drop a tape measure on the top of your foot, it's not going to break your foot, but it hurts and it's annoying. So don't do that. And also, if you're measuring something, try to keep the tape measure on whenever you're measuring. If I'm measuring something over here, you see what happens? The tape measure's getting floppy. And what happens is they get kinked. And then we're back to it doesn't retract right. And then it's just really annoying. So be a little gentle with it. They'll last forever. If you get a tape measure that you're using out there and it's kind of garbage, talk to your supervisor, get another one. All right, so let's go into the basics. How to read a tape measure. And we're going to start at the very, very easiest level and kind of work our way up. So for some of you guys, this will be easy. All right, so if you look at your tape measure, the first thing you'll see are lines that go all the way down the tape with numbers next to them. Those are the inch marks. Super easy. They're even written on there for you. So if you're measuring, you measure to the whole inch. This is the scale that you would use. And scales, how little? We'll talk about scale in a second. So paper clips, about 1 inch long. That's a good rule of thumb. Regular paper clips, about 1 inch long. So if we took those inches and split them all in half, those are half inches. One thing that you'll notice, 90% of the tape measures you'll use, your half-inch mark will go about halfway down the blade. Makes it a little bit easier to see so you don't have to count them all. Your half inches go halfway down the blade. The staple, like the staple you guys have in your paper, that's about a half-inch long. Good rule of thumb, kind of gets things to scale in your head. So you notice the distance between each of these lines is a half inch. So between that 2.5 mark and 3 is half of an inch. And that's how you would read it: 1.5, 2.5, 3.5. You always add your increments to the whole number before it, right? That makes sense. So I've shrunk this down a little bit. So you can count the lines, right? If you were to count the lines on this, they're half-inch increments. You could technically count it as 1/2, 2/2, 3/2, 4/2. You could do that. But you're not going to read a tape measure like that. 4/2 is the same as 2 inches. So you always want to keep an odd number on the top of the fraction, and you want the bottom number to the lowest number it can be. So in this case, you would write it as 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 1.5, 2. All right, so everybody's got a wooden dowel in front of them. Go ahead and measure. How many lefties do I have? Jamie, you're left-handed? Any other left-handers? Do you run a tape measure with your right hand or your left hand? Okay, so for you, flip the orientation around and pull the tape measure with your left, but you want to measure from the end to the front side of the orange tape. And be nice with me because I kind of stretched out electrical tape when I was wrapping it around, so it might be a little bit off. What are you guys getting?
3.5.
All right, good. Yes. So I didn't mess it up too bad. Anybody not get 3.5? What'd you get?
3 3/8.
We're going to round up to the nearest half. Eric made me do these at like midnight last night. So I was half asleep. My cat was helping me.
We sure would wonder when you guys left, guys. They said, "Hey, you're done about an hour tomorrow. You have to do a measurement course." So.
All right, so good. 3.5. You can write that on your paper if you want. Kind of follow along on your paper. Yep, 3.5. All right, so we're going to take those half inches and we're going to break them in half again. It's all making a lot of sense. If you're not familiar with this, it should be kind of making a little bit of sense, like, oh, okay. So each distance between each line shown on here is 1/4 inch. It's about the thickness of a number 2 pencil. So if you're keeping things in your mind, like somebody says a half inch, I don't know what that means, but if they give me a household item, that makes a little more sense. About the thickness of a pencil. So when you're reading this, very same thing we talked about before. You always want an odd number on top and the lowest number possible on the bottom. So there's 1/4, 3/4. Now, technically, the line halfway between is 2/4. That's an even number. We don't want to use an even number on the top, so we always go to the half. The 1 inch lines will always be inches, or the inch lines will always be inches. Everything halfway is always be a half inch. These numbers will always be quarters. Even though there might be fraction equivalents, always want odd number on top, smallest number on the bottom possible. So those are the 1/4 inch. Those will always be your quarter measurements, no matter what else you're looking at. Those will always be the halves and always be the inches. So that's how you would read that bit of the tape measure. All right, we're going to split everything in half again. So now we're down to 1/8. Now, if you notice, there are 8 lines now between each inch mark, because they're divided in 8, right? So you have 8/8 in an inch. You're going to read these the same way. Odd number on top, smallest number on the bottom. About a 2-inch nail, 2-inch regular nail is just about 1/8 of an inch thick. About how thick an 1/8 is. So you notice here, this is showing all the 8s, 1, 3, 5, and 7. Those are the odds, right? So those are the ones you always read. A half inch is 4/8. You're not going to read that as 4/8. You'll read it as a half when you're measuring something or laying something out. Kind of bringing this together, if you had a tape measure showing 8s, these are the numbers you would use. 1/8, quarter, 3/8, half, 5/8, 3/4, 7/8. Go ahead and grab your dowels again. And you've got 3 measurements to take this time. Anybody know what that symbol is over the circle? Got the circle with a line in it. Anybody know what that means?
No zeros.
No zeros. Yes. No. Shut up. Yes, sir. What does it mean?
Diameter.
Yes, it means diameter. Diameter is the width of the circle. Radius is halfway. You are almost never going to measure radii or radiuses here, unless you're measuring a bend radius in a hose or in a leg of something. I'd say 99% of the time you're going to measure the diameter, the width across the circle. So measure the diameter of your dowel, the thickness of the tape, the orange tape, and measure from the orange end to the far end of the black tape. And write those on your paper. What? Is it accurate? It's probably more accurate than my wooden dowel. Yeah. I have used it to measure long distance, like I'm trying to measure across the room or something.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't matter. All right. What did you guys get for the width of the orange tape? Quarter of an inch. Very good. Well, it's not going to be the same on the paper, because the paper is not to scale.
Oh, I don't remember.
Did I not put NTS on the paper?
I don't have a. I was measuring the paper instead of because I didn't have a.
Now
I didn't have a real.
All right. So don't listen to Eric. He was measuring the wrong thing. What did you guys get for the diameter?
Cool.
Got 3/4? Should be 3/4. That was messing me up. Yep. So if you guys have metric, make sure the set of numbers on top.
Yes.
Very good. Now, see? Have enough for everybody?
So that's. But you never know what you're gonna get.
Yes, that's 3/4. Yep.
You never know what you're gonna get.
Yeah, that's always a surprise. You should always be surprised when you're measuring things. All right, how about the distance from the end to the far end of the black tape? Anybody else?
7 3/8.
We get 7 3/8? Good. Now we're going to come around and when we're working in groups and we'll work a little extra with you. All right, good. Hopefully that's what I had. All right. Yes. Now we're going to break everything back down one more time, split everything in half. Now we're down to 16ths. You guys will be measuring a lot of stuff to 16ths out there. This is pretty common. So a quarter is about a 16th of an inch thick. An American quarter. Canadian quarter is a little thinner. So a quarter is about a 16th of an inch thick. So what I'm showing here is just a 1 inch section of tape, just to make it a little bit easier to see because our lines are getting small. Talking about how we typically read a measurement. Odd number on top, the smallest number on the bottom, smallest denominator possible. So this is how you would read this tape, this section of the tape measure. Notice that half inch is always read as a half inch. The quarter inches are always read as quarter inches. The eighths are always read as eighths. 16ths are always the odd 16ths. You have 16 lines between on this shown right here because they're 16 16ths an inch. Get to do math today. You guys didn't know you're doing math today. All right, we're going to do it again. Split everything in half again. Now we've got 30 seconds. You guys will have lots of good stuff out there measured to the 30 seconds. So don't be alarmed. You will see it though. So, whoops, I think I have this a little bit out of order. So a credit card, the thickness of a credit card or bank card is about a 32nd of an inch. Your We Connect card things, those are a 32nd of an inch thick. So the little teeny tiny lines, those are your 30 seconds. Now, across the bottom, I don't have all of the 30 seconds you'll use listed because there wasn't enough room. You're just going to use the odds. Just like everything you read on tape measure, you're always going to use the odds. All right, so some of you guys might be like, oh, no, let's do this first. Go ahead and measure the length of the dowel. And from the orange end to the closest end of the black tape. Eric probably dropped it.
David Ritchie used that one.
Oh, probably. He's probably thrown it at people. What are you guys getting in for the overall length for number 6?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else get something different? Because I got something a little different to 3/4 on mine. Not saying you're wrong because for the overall length.
Half 11, 16. Oh, so like half of 10 is 5.
Colby, what'd you get?
11, I think 7/16.
Okay. Anybody else? Well, these and said they were 12-inch dowels. I guarantee they're not 12 inches long. Yes.
6 and 9/16.
For number 5?
Maybe.
Okay.
Yes.
To the black tape. All right, so what did you guys get for number 5? From the orange end to the close end of the black tape.
6 and 5/8.
6 5/8. What'd you get?
6 and 9/16.
It should be 6 9/16. I don't remember. And also, in all fairness, it's electrical tape which stretches a little bit, so this isn't the most precise thing we'll have better stuff, but this is a good way to practice. Let's see here.
Anybody not get 6 and 9/16?
Couple people.
I got 6 and 5/8. 11/16.
Or reading it right and make it taste.
I mean, that's possible. With taste mint.
Let's see. Yeah, let's see.
The whole row.
Okay.
I guess it depends how it's.
Yeah, look,
Should
actually.
be okay. He's in between. He's a 30-second there.
Okay, and this one doesn't measure 30 seconds, so.
Yeah, he's in between.
Yep, and that's same with his. So he's got a.
Okay.
Your scale's different. We'll talk about scale here in a second. So some of you guys don't have 32nd inches on your tape measure, so we sabotage. Sabotage. Good. We'll be doing more of this too in a little bit. All right. So one thing let's talk about. So why are there so many numbers? Why are we just 30 seconds? Sometimes you guys will be measuring a 64. So what's the deal with that? All right. Why do we need so many numbers? So we're going to talk about this called discrimination. Discrimination in this instance refers to the resolution of our measurement, of those slices. How far you break it down. All right, so if we talk about weight and height. All right, so I'm about 5 feet tall. little bit over 5 feet tall. Anybody here 6 feet? All right, he's close to 6 feet. So when we measure the height of a person, we do feet and inches, right? If I just said, okay, anybody here 5 feet, anybody here 6 feet? If you had to pick one, I think 2 of us would be 5 feet and everybody else would be 6 feet. But that wouldn't be very accurate because there's quite a bit of difference in heights. But if we were only using feet, we don't have enough discrimination, so we use feet and inches. So if we use pounds, we use pounds for weight. I'm not going to see what my weight is. Let's pretend it's $1.30. So 130 pounds. Not too often we go, I weigh 130 pounds and 4 ounces. Because we don't need that much discrimination with our weight. Pounds is good enough. If I ask somebody what's the height of this baby, or the height of the newborn baby, how do we measure infants, newborns?
Inches.
Inches? Always inches. Nobody's going to be like, it's about 1.5 feet. Because a baby's not going to be 1 foot or 2 feet. It's obviously going to be somewhere in between. So we use inches. How about the weight of an infant? What do we use for a weight of a baby?
Pounds and ounces.
Pounds and ounces. Absolutely. So when my daughter was born, she was 5 pounds and 9 ounces. They used the APGAR scale or whatever for the health of an infant. Everything else on the APGAR scale was fantastic. She was super healthy. 5 pounds, 9 ounces is an automatic to the neonatal unit, which is too small. They said, you know what? They added a ½ ounce on because they're like, we think that she's perfectly healthy. She's just really small. She'll be better off with you than in a neonatal unit with nurses and whatever. So they fudged her weight. Her birth certificate's falsified. But they gave her that extra ½ ounce so she didn't have to go to the neonatal unit, which I appreciated. That was a good thing. But we have to use ounces with babies because those ounces are really, really important. So it's not going to be 6 pounds or 7 pounds. There's a difference between 6 pounds 1 ounce and 6 pounds 15 ounces. Baby. Great. Now think about when you were in school. F, right? F. Well, I've only done a couple F. Well, imagine if you only got to do pass or fail. If you got everything in the class right, you passed. If you missed anything at all, you failed. You want to pass that, or you want to take that class? No. You know, you're having a bad day, right? So that's when we have discrimination in grades. Usually percentages, but A, B, C, D, F. If you have a bad day, you still can get an A. You don't have to have everything perfect. And think about our PTO, and I'm not sure your PTO rules, so I will say, if you could only take days for your PTOs, right? So I've got PTO, I've got a doctor's appointment, I'm going to be about a ½ hour late. Well, you can only take full days, sorry. With that. No, we do it in hours. Might be 4 block hours, you guys. I really don't know. But it's nice if you can take hours. That way, if you're going to just be a little bit late, you only take an hour PTO. You don't have to take a whole day. So keep going about talking about discrimination and having the proper units. So if you guys had this fitting, how long's that fitting?
2 inches.
Inches, right? Super, super easy. How long's that one? It's about, we don't know. We could take a good guess. That's probably about 2 3/4 or 1 3/4. Yeah, probably right. We don't have enough discrimination on that scale to read it. So we need some more lines, right? So we add those lines in. 1 7/8. Pretty close. But if we didn't have those 1/8 marks, we would be inaccurate. We would have to guess. The lengths, how long are those threads on that bolt? Here, right? We can't tell. It's really hard. So let's blow it up a little bit so we can see it. So if we need to know the length of each thread or the length of the threaded portion, we need better discrimination, especially just for an individual thread. I think we got 30 seconds in this case. Oh, it's a surprise. I know what it was. Apparently didn't have it on there. All right, so who here has a tape measure like this with imperial and metric on it. I think I've got 3. Yours is.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got both.
Wait, I think it's actually 7.
You should have inches and centimeters.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we're gonna wind up using those. That's why we're gonna do these in groups so we have enough tape measures. So one thing that has been happening, I'd say over the last 5 years or more, at least JLG, is we're using a lot more metric fasteners. So your fasteners are gonna be in millimeters instead of inches. For example, if I have a 19 millimeter bolt, that is so close to 3/4 of an inch bolt. If you're holding them both in your hands, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. They're very, very similar. 19 millimeter plate, eyeballing it, you would not be able to tell the difference between a 3/4 inch plate. They're just very, very similar. So when you're measuring imperial, you'll use the top of your tape measure. If you have metric, you're going to use the bottom. And honestly, reading metric measurements is pretty gravy. It's very easy because there aren't any eighths and 3/8 and 16ths and 32nds. It's a line. So there are 10 millimeters in 1 centimeter, right? So they break everything's nice even numbers. It's easy to divide. It's easy to add. So if you're measuring something that was 7 to the 7 line here, that's 7 centimeters. If it's the line before, then it's 69 millimeters. I would guess, my shop folks, correct me, you're not going to get millimeter stuff. Nobody's going to say, oh, that's 7 millimeters. It's going to be 7 centimeters. It's going to be 70 millimeters. We'll measure in millimeters. And it's easy to do that. You just look at the lines. That is super gravy. And we'll be doing a little bit of that here in a minute. All right, so fractions to decimals. Fractions to decimals. Get your phone out and do it with your phone. If you like to do it old school on a piece of paper, you can do that too. Dividing a fraction, divide the top by the bottom to get the decimal. So a 1/4 inch, 1/4. You divide 4 into 1, you get 0.25. So 0.25 is a 1/4 inch. 0.125 is 1/8 of an inch. 625 is 3/8. 5/8. Thank you. I'm rusty. Now, even better is we have conversion charts. Feel free to use a conversion chart, okay? We were talking today, you had a great idea. We're going to print these up for you guys, for everybody on like a little badge size thing. This may not be something you use every day. You might use it once a week, might use it once a month. But they're going to be some that you use over and over and over. It'd be really handy to go, oh, that's right. In case you have to do it. You will. We have to do it. But we have these little charts, maybe not this exact one, but something very similar. That'll show you how to convert those. And something else you're going to have to do, or you might have to do, is add fractions. Now, it's been a hot minute since I've been out of school, so I haven't added fractions in a long time. And I don't expect anybody to be grabbing their piece of paper unless you're into it. Feel free. But it's a lot easier way to convert fractions to decimals, or to add fractions. Convert the fraction to the decimal number. Use your chart. Add the numbers together, the decimal numbers, because that's just regular numbers. That's easy. And then convert your final number back to fractions. So we have a little example here. All right, so say we have to add 3 1/4 plus 2 1/2. First we'll convert it. What's 3 1/4 in decimals?
175.
1/4 inch. So if we're going to convert 3 1/4 inch, so the 3 we already know, we're not doing anything with that. What is the metric equivalent of an inch? Or, oh gosh, so sorry, 1/4 inch. Yeah, find it on here, down here at the bottom. So it's 3.25, and how about half? What's the conversion for half? Yeah, 0.5. That's an easy one. So those numbers are 3.25 and 2.5. Then you just add them up, right? You get 5.75. So you take that final number and convert it back to the fraction, so you can read it with a tape measure. So what's 0.75 in a fraction?
3/4.
3/4. Yep. So you get 5 3/4. So it's not hard to do. You do it a couple times, like, oh yeah, that's easy. So you just take your fractions, figure out the decimal equivalent, add them together, or subtract them, whatever you're doing, and then convert your final number back to the fraction. So you can lay it out on the tape measure. So I'm going to talk about a couple of cheats that might make it a little bit easier for folks that are just learning. Know your scale or your discrimination. So some of you guys only have 30-second tape measures. Some of you only had 16ths. All right, so how do you know that? Now, I can count all the lines. Okay, I can count all the lines. But a little bit easier way is just a visual aid. Remember we talked about the 1-inch lines go all the way down the tape. Half-inch lines go about halfway. Quarter-inch goes about a quarter. The smaller the increment, the shorter the line. Okay? So, 1 inch is the lines all the way down the tape. Half-inch is about halfway. Quarter-inch is a quarter of the way. Eighth, 16th, and 32nd. So, kind of a nice cheat if you're trying to figure out real quick, and this is the same for if you're measuring something, to know if you need to use a 16th or a 32nd. It's just count how many long lines you have. Count them in descending order. So I've got 1 is the longest, 2 is the second longest, 3 is the third longest, the fourth one. So if I've got 4 lines, it's 1/8 of an inch scale. If I have 5, it's a 16th. If I have 6, it's a 32nd. I expect you all to memorize that today. But as you use a tape measure, that'll become second nature. Oh yeah. I've got half, quarter, 1/8, 16th. Okay, this goes to the 16th. Another cheat is to know some of those equivalents. So when you're looking, these to me are like my targets. Here's your quarter inches. Quarter inch after quarter. So all those numbers are the same as a quarter inch. 2/8, 4/16, 8/32. We don't read the tape measure that way because we want the odd number on top. But if I'm trying to figure out a line to the left or the right of the quarter inch, and I'm looking at eighths, if the line passes 3/8, it's the line before, right? Does that make sense? Same with the 16th. I know that this line right here is 4/16 because it's the quarter inch. If I'm going to 16th past it, it's 5/16. If I'm going before, it's 3/16. Because when you get out there and you get in a rush, you can count the lines. I'm going to say it again, there's no shame in counting lines until you get used to knowing how to do it. This will save you a little bit of time. Half-inch, the same way, and I know a couple of us, when we were measuring, it was a little bit over a half. An easy way to get to that is, okay, I know I've got a 30-second scale. It's 1/32 past a half-inch. Half-inch is 16 30-seconds. One more line is 17 30-seconds. You're not going to memorize all this, but you will get a feel for it after you do it a couple weeks, a couple months. Same thing with a 3/4. You're measuring something that's about 3/4 of the way in. Use these conversions. So I know this is my quarter. My next longest is my 1/8. Next one is my 16th. The next one is my 32nd. So if I need to know that this one, I know, okay, 3/4. I know 24 3/4 is 24 30-seconds is the same as 3/4. So that's one more. That's 25. Yes?
So would 11 fourths be the same as 11 and 12/16?
Yes.
That is the same?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Yep, you got it. And that will help you, and even if you don't memorize all these, if you're measuring stuff in 16ths the most often, memorize those 16ths ones. It'll save you a little bit of time. This will come second nature, I promise. If you haven't done it, it can take a minute. It does. It takes a minute. It should. I mean, I was a fabricator. It's been a long time. I was a machinist and fabricator. I could do this in my sleep. When I started writing this, I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, if you don't use it, you forget it. If you use it all the time, it's automatic. You don't even think about it.
I didn't think they still made these anymore.
Yeah, you get your phone out and do the super Smart
What
man.
you buy now, got them all on there.
Yeah, and a lot of them do. We might. I don't know if we have any of those in this one. Some of them have all your 8s marked. Some will have all your 16s marked. But they're nice.
Yeah, I bought a digital one.
And they got this. Just tells you boop. Just tells you the number.
Yep,
Those are nice.
the one I have is accurate to within a 1/16 of an inch.
Okay. Yeah. Now I don't know if I'd use that in here because somebody's gonna run off with it or it'll get banged out. I mean, I didn't say that. All right. So, but I want to talk about some measurements that don't exist because there are lots of them, and your guys will hear this out there. Tell them come talk to me. They come yell at me. But there are measurements that don't exist. A heavy, light, anything. Okay? So that's 4 and a heavy 1/8. Doesn't exist. That means it's probably the next 16th. Or it's a light 2.5 inches. If it's the line before the 1/2 inch, use the line before. So light or heavy doesn't exist. You'll hear that old, that's 1 and a heavy 16th. No, it's not. Yeah. Okay, so this is not 1 and a heavy 3/4. And there will be 5,000 people out there that will go, that's 1 and a heavy 3/4. No, it's not. Okay? Nope. Doesn't exist. One and 13/16. Did my lines come up when I hit the button? Okay, I blinked and I missed it. So you need better discrimination. If you're somebody's saying a heavy or a light, they're not using small enough discrimination. None of these exist. A frog's hair, or the obscene equivalent of a frog's hair. A little over, a little under, just about or almost. Those are not measurements. Those are numbers. And numbers only. So if you're measuring something that's a little over, maybe you need a better discrimination, better lines on your tape. Some other measurements that don't exist. They're my favorites. There's no such thing as like 3 1/4 0.5 or 13/16 0.75 or 2.5 and an 1/8. What's happening here? And I hear this a lot. 3 1/4 0.5 means it's halfway between 3 1/4 and the next line on the tape. That's what's happening there. Same with 13/16 0.75. That's a little bit older or a little bit over. Don't ever mix decimals and fractions. Ever, ever, ever. You can't read decimals on a tape measure unless you're using the metric end. But don't combine fractions and decimals. It's always a fraction. And I guarantee you'll talk people out there that are mixing both. Somebody's going to say, that's about 13.5.2 or something. No, it isn't. Tell them it's not. So the next thing I want to talk about is called parallax error. Very fancy word. You don't have to memorize it. Let everybody grab your tape measure. And hook it on the far side of your table. Everybody scoot your chair back all the way to the table behind you. All right. Everybody scoot it back. What's the width of that table? Kind of keep it in your head. You don't have to say it out loud. All right. Now, everybody stand up. Come around to the side of your table. And I want you to hold it on there and tell me what it's, you don't have to say it out loud, but read it again. Stand right in the middle of the table, though, so you can see it. You're not standing in the middle of the table. There you go. Yeah, stand right in the middle of the table. All right, everybody's kind of got your number. All right, everybody go to the, stand on the edge of the tape, stand on the edge of the table that you're measuring, and then read it. Put your eyeballs right over it. Put your snoot right over that tape measure. See? Did everybody get the same measurements all 3 times? I'm sorry. It was frog's hair. It was frog's hair. It was 24 frog's hair. That is a parallax error. It's like, what? What does that even mean? All right, so if you have your eyeballs, you're standing on one side of whatever you're measuring, and you're looking up at the tape, it's going to move where that line looks like it's at. Same thing if you're on this side and you're looking down on the tape. Where's my eyeball? It's not going to line up properly. You have to put your nose right over what it is you're measuring. Cook or bake. So if you've got to measure out a cup and a half of water, and I'm standing here and I look at it, and I go, yeah, that's a cup and a half, and I go do something with it. And Jim or James?
Jim.
Same thing with Joe. Same thing with everybody in here. Guess what? I'm 5'2". You guys are closer to 6 foot. There's actually a parallax error. You have to take the measuring cup and hold it right up to your eyeballs to see if it's a cup and a half. When you guys get home, do this. Get a glass measuring cup with actual measurements on it. Pour it up to a cup and a half and just stand above it and look, and then pick it up and put it right in front of your eyes. You'll see it's about a quarter. It can make a quarter cup or more difference. That's a parallax error. So whenever you're measuring something, always put your nose right over what it is that you're measuring, so you don't see it too far left or too far right. Because that can make a big difference. That can make 1/16, eighth of an inch difference. Some kind of common terms you'll hear: length, width, height, thickness. And you guys can argue with me on this one if you want to. I'll argue this one, but when you're measuring something, length is typically your longest measurement. That's your long one. That's why it's called length. Width. Measurement across, to me, this should be the second largest dimension. Length, width, height. So we've got X, Y, and Z direction, or whatever you want to call it. So the height will be the next smallest one. Finally, thickness. So if we're measuring this rectangular square, it might be 12 inches long by 4 inches wide by 2 inches tall by a quarter inch thick. So length, width, height, and thickness. We do this all the time. I kind of like to put a couple of rules to it to make it a little bit easier. Because somebody say, oh, the width's 2 inches and the height's 4 inches. It's the same piece. It's the same thing. It's just a matter how you want to talk about it. But it's the same dimensions. Some other things that are important, especially for you guys in assembly to know, is measuring fasteners. You don't always measure fasteners from the top of the head down to the end. If you have a flat-headed fastener, and I think all of the fasteners I have on your table are all flat-headed. Yep. You measure from underneath the head to the end of the bolt, screw, whatever. Underneath the head. If you have anything that's flared, you measure from the total top to the bottom, from the top of it. If you have an oval, some of you guys will have rounded fasteners, you split the difference. Measure where the top would be. All right, so look at these. Those screws are all the same designation of screw. They're just different types of screws. They're all 5/16 by 8, which is, you guys learn this. What's the dash 18 mean? You guys remember? Say again?
Thread gauge.
Yeah, you guys did that in your e-learning. 5 inch and quarter, that's the diameter. But all of those will all be called out the same way. Just one will be called a bolt, one will be called a flathead, one will be called whatever. So be careful with that. Somebody's like, oh, it's a 2-inch bolt. Don't measure the whole length of the bolt if it's flat. Measure from underneath the head. Here's an example of a hex head bolt or hex head cap screw, whatever you want to call it. If you're measuring the head of the bolt, that's your spanner size. A spanner's a wrench. It's the same thing. I don't know what's used here more, a spanner or a wrench. I've heard either one. But if somebody, let me get to that. Thread length is the length of threads, right? That makes perfect sense. In this case, the length's going to be from the bottom of the head, because it's a flathead device or thing. So you measure from the bottom of the head to the end of the bolt. The diameter given of a bolt is the diameter of the threaded portion, not the head. So if somebody's like, yeah, go ahead and put that 1/2 inch in, you're not going to use a 1/2 inch wrench. You're going to be putting in a 1/2 inch hole, and whatever the head size, that spanner size will give you your wrench size. So a 1/2 inch bolt is a 1/2 inch diameter. It takes a 3/4 inch wrench, unless it's a heavy hex. Right. So when I was really, really brand new, helping people build stuff, helping my dad do stuff in the garage, be like, oh, give me that 3/4 bolt and the wrench, and I'd bring the 3/4 wrench and a 3/4 bolt because I didn't know how it worked. Now I know.
So a 1/2 inch bolt would take a.
Yeah, and that's fun when you're first learning. Because you're like you ever worked on your car and you're like, oh, I'm looking in my manual and it says, oh, it's a 3/4 inch bolt, and I go grab the 3/4 inch wrench because the bolt's always diameter is always the part that goes in the hole. And it often won't tell you the wrench size. You gotta fiddle around and figure it out. They're charged for that though too. That's what I always use. Some other methods. You've got OD and ID. You'll do this a lot with your hoses. Anybody putting hoses on? And this is pretty self-explanatory. OD is the diameter of the outside. And that doesn't have to be a pipe or a hose. It could be a rectangle as well, by the way, or anything that's open. The outside diameter is OD. Inside is ID. So if you're measuring the ID of a boom tube, for example, I'll kind of see these at 2. You're going to push your tape measure up against the inside wall and measure. Remember we talked about the play and the hook? If you're measuring ID of something, you're usually going to be pushing that hook in. If you're using the OD, I will not scrape up your TV there with my tape measure. ID, you're going to hook on the outside and measure to the outside. So that's OD and ID. And another thing to talk about is sometimes you can't measure from the end of the tape. A lot of times you're not going to. It's just not convenient. You might have a tape measure that looks like that. Don't use it. One. But if you're in a pinch or you're in a hurry or something happens and that's what you got, don't try to use the hook end. You're going to be all screwed up, right? You can measure from any point on a tape measure, and you just do a little bit of math with it. Or if you're trying to measure the distance between holes. Distance between holes can be really tricky. You're not going to usually be able to hold the hook on the end of a hole very well. It's just the thickness of the hook is going to mess you up. So start at a convenient inch line and do a little bit of math. So let's talk about that. All right, so we're going to measure this plate, and I've got a screwed up tape measure. And my tape measure's chomped off. So the first thing you do is put a 1-inch mark on the outside edge of the hole. And it doesn't have to be the 1 inch, whatever's convenient for you. Right? So if you're measuring parts that's on, it might be a little bit easier to start at 3 inches or 4 inches. It doesn't matter. Just start at an inch increment. Put it on the outside of the hole. So the next thing you do, it shows you how it's lined up there. So then you're going to use where you're at and measure the outside of the next hole. I did the inside edge of these holes, not the outside edge, so I just noticed that. Use the same edge when you're measuring distances between holes. All right, so measure the edge of the next hole. Easy peasy. What is that dimension? You guys see it? Remember your cheats. So if we look at this, we've got 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch. All right, so these are 2 and 15/16. Are those 8s? What?
1 and 15. 1 and 16. It's 1 and 15, 16.
It's hard to tell up here.
It's the first
No,
one.
you
It's-
said 16s.
You said 2 and 15.
It's not 2, it's 1 and 15/16.
It's 1 and 15.
Yes.
Started at the 1-inch mark.
No, we haven't subtracted that yet, Jim. Just don't work ahead. No working ahead. So if we're looking at this, the number we see, right, is 2 and 15/16. But we're going to subtract that inch because we started an inch in. So you guys work too far. You guys already figured it out before you even explain how to do it. So if you're just looking at this tape measure, it says 2 and 15/16. But we need to subtract wherever we started, right? So we need to subtract an inch because we started at the 1 inch mark. So the actual distance is 1 15/16. Now you guys have a plate exercise. I think it's on the second page of your little book. Actually, let's get, what time, you know what? It's lunchtime, my friends. It is almost lunchtime. All right, we're going to pause this. Hopefully it was recording.
How far did you get, Jen?
That's it. The rest is all
Good.